St Mére Eglise is famous for being the first town liberated by the Americans. The first town liberated was Ranville, that was by the British. St Mére Eglise is also famous for the dummy representing John Steele, who got caught up on the steeple. A little known incident happened here, which was more than noteworthy. St Mére Eglise was taken relatively easily by Lieutenant Colonel Kraus with 600 men at 4 o'clock in the morning on the 6th. But then the 505th had to defend themselves against counterattacks from the Germans. In 1944, the retirement home was the outskirts of the town, and so that way it was just fields. On the 7th, 3 battalions of the 1058th Regiment attacked from the north, backed up by a regiment of the Sturm Battalion. That means Stug III's or self-propelled guns. Company D were driven from their positions back towards Ste Mére Eglise. Breakthrough seemed to be imminent. The 1st Battalion of the 1058 attacked on the east of the road over there. The Stugs came down the road towards Ste Mére Eglise, and the 2nd Battalion was on the west side of the road over there. The Germans pressed their attack to the outskirts of Ste Mére Eglise. A 57mm gun, commanded by Lieutenant Clift, engaged a column of trucks coming down the road, knocked out the first truck, thus stopping their advance. An armoured car then engaged the anti-tank gun, but the anti-tank gun knocked it out as well. The Stug then came down the road, firing smoke canisters in front of it to hide its advance. As it had appeared out of the smoke, Lieutenant Clift gave adjustments to the guns, and they hit that, and that was stopped. But its 75mm gun kept firing. It took another 2 rounds to knock it out. The Stug had advanced to 50 yards from Van der Voort's command post. Clift's men moved the gun further up near the Stug to have a clear view of the road. And then another Stug advanced, fired on the gun, wounding the crew. Thus the gun was out of action. A private John actually got out of his foxhole, went to the gun. He'd never fired an anti-tank gun before, but he loaded it and fired at the Stug. That missed. He reloaded it, fired again, and that stopped the Stug. Van der Voort didn't have many men to counter the German attack. D Company Reserve was made up of Lieutenant Chief Turnbull and 16 men who had survived Neuville-au-Plain on the 6th. Behind them was E Company, made up of 74 men with just personal weapons. Waverly Wray, who was executive officer for D Company, he went to see Van der Voort to ask for help. Van der Voort told him to counterattack the German flank. Waverly Wray had acquired woodman skills from childhood, and he said he never missed a shot. He was very religious. He never cussed, drank, bet, or chased girls. The men called him the Deacon, but not to his face. Wray went out on reconnaissance. He knew the terrain pretty well, as D Company had occupied it before being pushed out. Then he led Lieutenant McKray's 1st platoon around to the left, or the eastern flank of the Germans, approaching from the east. He then went forward along a ditch until he got to a lane, and he heard some voices the other side of a hedge. He peered through and he saw 8 men around the radio. In his best German he said, "Hands hoch!" All of them put their hands up except one, who went to get his pistol, and Waverly shot him directly. At the same time, 2 Germans stood up in a trench 100 yards to his left rear and tried to take his head off with a burst from their Smiters. Wray disregarded this and shot the 7 men. He jumped back in the ditch to reload an 8-round clip
into his M1, then shot the two Germans across the field with one shot each.
The 8 men in the lane was the commanding officer and the HQ staff of the 1st Battalion 1058th Regiment, and so he'd knocked out the head. Lieutenant McKray arrived the other side of the field just as Wray was calling "Hands hoch." He couldn't see who he was firing at, but he saw the two Germans to his rear. He instructed his platoon to fire at them, and then when Wray had shot the two Germans, he disappeared back into the hedge again. Shortly afterwards he came out again, pushing two German prisoners in front of him, saying, "John Brown Germans." The two Germans firing at Wray had taken off a piece of his ear. The bullet had gone right through the centre of his helmet. Half an inch lower it would have gone through his forehead, but it was deflected around his helmet, broke his strap and took a piece of his ear off. His neck and shoulder and his uniform were covered in blood.
Wray set the platoon 60mm mortar and a 30 caliber machine gun on the left flank of the Germans, who were in a sunken lane. The platoon was along the hedge, perpendicular to the lane. Wray placed mortar fire at the far end of the lane and walked the subsequent rounds up the lane towards the platoon. At the same time, the machine gun fired on the men packed in the lane. This all caused the survivors to spill out into the field, where they were picked off by the platoon.
After a few minutes, a German major came into the field with a white flag. He was a doctor. He spoke to Lieutenant McKray, and it was decided that the German wounded and the medics would stay with the Americans, and an American glider pilot who was wounded would be released by the Germans. But just then the platoon started firing again. The Germans on the right flank had started pulling out. Shortly afterwards, the Germans fired a green flare and an 88mm gun started firing at them. But the D Company pulled back, and the remnants of the shattered 1st Battalion of the Germans pulled out. This left the flank of the Stugs exposed, so they pulled out, which left the flank of the 2nd Battalion exposed, and they pulled back. So D Company could now take up their initial positions. Now Waverly Wray's action had led to shattering the 1st Battalion of the 1058th Grenadier Regiment. So during the rest of the 7th and the night, the German artillery continued to pound the crossroads at Ste Mére Eglise.
Before having his wounds attended to, he replenished his stock of grenades. When Vandervoort saw him, he said, "They're getting a bit close to you, aren't they, Waverly?" Wray replied, "Yes, sir, but I reckon I'm getting closer to them than they are to me." When they took back the field in the lane where the battle had been, they found the 10 bodies of the Germans, each with one hole in the forehead. Wray took responsibility for having them buried. Waverly Wray had more or less single-handedly stifled the northern attack on St Mere Eglise. His outstanding courage and skill with his weapon had brought him through. But he wasn't invincible. He was killed on the 21st of September during Market Garden near Nijmegen. He has a granite cemetery marker in Battsville, Mississippi. There are several easy ways you can help the channel. You can tap on like, tap on subscribe plus the bell, make comments, ask questions, or even on Patreon. Here are some videos you might like to watch.